The Legend of Alexander Suvorov, a Bedtime Story. Chapter 1. A Boy Named Alexander. In the gentle days of autumn, when the leaves turned gold and crimson across the vast Russian landscape, a story begins that will carry us through the remarkable life of one of history's greatest military commanders. Close your eyes and imagine the year 1730, in the grand city of Moscow, where the streets were cobbled with ancient stones and the air filled with the scent of wood smoke and falling leaves. In a noble household, there lived a boy named Alexander Vasilyevich Suvorov. He was not a strong child, not at first. His body was small and frail, and he often fell ill during the long, cold Russian winters. His mother would wrap him in warm blankets and tell him stories by the fireplace, while outside the wind howled through the bare branches of birch trees. The flames danced and flickered, casting shadows on the walls, and young Alexander would listen with wide, attentive eyes. His mother, Avdosha Fedoseyevna, was a woman of gentle disposition but strong character. She came from a noble family and had been educated in the manner of Russian aristocratic women of her time. She spoke French fluently, knew literature and poetry, and had a deep faith that she passed to her son. In the evenings, when Alexander's health permitted, she would read to him from books of history and tales of ancient heroes. Her voice was soft and melodious, and Alexander would close his eyes and imagine himself in those distant times and places. His father, Vasily Ivanovich Suvorov, was a general in the Imperial Russian Army, a man of discipline and honor. He would return home from his duties wearing his uniform with its gleaming buttons, and Alexander would watch him with a mixture of awe and longing. The boy dreamed of becoming strong, of serving his country, of leading soldiers into battle. But his frail body seemed to mock these dreams. Vasily Ivanovich was a veteran of Peter the Great's campaigns, having served in the Great Northern War against Sweden. He had seen the transformation of Russia from a relatively backward nation into a major European power, had witnessed the creation of Russia's modern army and navy, had participated in victories that expanded Russian territory and influence. He carried with him the memories of those campaigns, the lessons learned in decades of service, and he observed his frail son with both concern and hidden hope. The Suvorov family home in Moscow was substantial but not ostentatious, reflecting Vasily Ivanovich's practical military temperament. The rooms were furnished with solid, functional furniture rather than elaborate decorations. The walls held portraits of ancestors, maps of campaigns, and weapons from earlier generations. For young Alexander, the house was a museum of military history, each object telling a story of service and sacrifice. Yet Alexander possessed something that could not be measured by physical strength alone. Within his small frame burned an indomitable spirit, a mind as sharp as any sword, and a determination that would one day move mountains. He would spend hours in his father's library, surrounded by the musty smell of old books and leather bindings, reading about the great military commanders of history. He devoured accounts of Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, Hannibal, and the legendary generals who had shaped empires and changed the course of human events. The library was Alexander's sanctuary, a place where the weak boy could become strong through knowledge. Dust motes floated through the sunlight that streamed through tall windows, and the young boy would sit cross-legged on the floor, his finger tracing the lines of tactical diagrams and battle formations. He studied the Roman legions, the Macedonian phalanx, the strategies of ancient warriors who had conquered vast territories through wit and cunning as much as through force. He read works by military theorists, Vegetius's De Re Militari, Morris's Strategicon, accounts of the campaigns of Gustavus Adolphus and Charles XII of Sweden. He studied mathematics and geometry, understanding that military engineering and artillery required precise calculation. He learned geography, memorizing the terrain of Europe and Asia, understanding how mountains, rivers, and plains affected military operations. He studied history not just for the stories but for the lessons, always asking himself, why did this commander succeed? Why did that army fail? What principles of warfare transcend time and place? But Alexander did not merely dream. He understood that dreams without action are like seeds never planted. So, in the quiet hours of dawn, when the rest of the household still slept, the young boy would creep out to the courtyard. There, in the pale morning light, he began to train his body as rigorously as he trained his mind. He would run around the courtyard, his breath creating small clouds in the cold air. At first, he could barely complete one lap before his lungs burned and his legs trembled. But he persisted. Day after day, week after week, month after month, he pushed himself harder. He would do exercises he had read about in military manuals, attempting to build strength in his thin arms and legs. When winter came and snow blanketed the ground, he would roll in the snow, hardening his body against the cold, teaching himself to endure discomfort. The servants would watch with concern as the young master subjected himself to these harsh exercises. They would whisper among themselves, wondering if the boy had lost his senses. Some tried to intervene, but Alexander would politely but firmly refuse their attempts to stop him. He had a vision of what he needed to become, and no amount of comfort or well-meaning concern would deter him. His mother worried, pleading with him to take care of himself, to not push so hard. She would stand at the window in her morning dress, watching her son train in the cold courtyard, and tears would gather in her eyes. "Alexander, my dear," she would say when he came inside, his cheeks red from cold and exertion, "you will make yourself ill. Please, rest, take care of yourself." But Alexander would smile at her with gentle determination and say, "Mother, a general must be strong in body and mind. I will serve Russia one day, and I must prepare." Then he would kiss her hand respectfully and return to his studies, leaving his mother to worry and pray for her determined son. As the seasons turned and years passed slowly like a river flowing through the Russian countryside, Alexander began to transform. The change was gradual, almost imperceptible day to day, but undeniable over months and years. His body grew stronger, his endurance increased, his health improved. The frequent illnesses that had plagued his childhood became less common, less severe. His mind grew sharper through constant study and self-discipline. His determination, already remarkable in childhood, became truly unshakable. He studied languages with the same intensity he brought to everything else. He learned to speak German and French fluently, knowing that these were the languages of European diplomacy and military science. He could read Latin, giving him access to classical texts. He memorized military regulations and tactical principles. He analyzed historical battles, understanding why commanders made certain decisions, learning from both their victories and their defeats. Young Alexander developed an extraordinary memory. He could recall conversations word for word, could reproduce maps he had seen weeks earlier, could cite passages from military texts he had read years before. This phenomenal recall would later serve him well in military service, allowing him to remember terrain details, unit positions, and supply situations without constantly referring to written notes. He also developed what would become a lifelong habit of rising extremely early. While others slept until the sun was well up, Alexander would wake in the pre-dawn darkness, light a candle, and begin his day's work. He believed that the quiet morning hours, when the world was still and distractions were few, were the most productive time for study and contemplation. This habit, formed in childhood, persisted throughout his entire life. When Alexander was 13 years old, a family friend visited his father's house. This friend was General Abraham Hannibal, an African nobleman who had been brought to Russia as a child and had risen to become one of Peter the Great's most trusted officers. He was an elderly man now, with a distinguished bearing and eyes that had seen countless campaigns. The general noticed young Alexander studying a map of Europe in the library, moving small toy soldiers across the terrain, reenacting historical battles. General Hannibal was the great-grandfather of Russia's most famous poet, Alexander Pushkin, though neither man knew what literary greatness would emerge from their family line. He had lived an extraordinary life, captured in Africa as a child, brought to Constantinople, then to Russia where Peter the Great became his godfather and patron. He had studied military engineering in France, fought in numerous campaigns, and risen to high rank through merit rather than birth. In the elderly general's weathered face, young Alexander saw living proof that determination and ability could overcome any disadvantage of birth or circumstance. General Hannibal watched in silence for several minutes, impressed by the boy's concentration and tactical understanding. The young boy was recreating the Battle of Narva from the Great Northern War, positioning Swedish and Russian forces according to historical accounts, analyzing how the battle had unfolded and considering alternative strategies that might have changed the outcome. Finally, the general spoke, his voice deep and measured. "Young man, you have the mind of a strategist. Tell me, which commander do you most admire?" Alexander looked up, startled to find the famous general watching him. He stood quickly and bowed respectfully, as he had been taught, but he answered without hesitation, his voice clear despite his youth. "Sir, I admire them all, for they each had unique strengths. Alexander the Great possessed boldness and the ability to inspire absolute devotion. Caesar combined military genius with political acumen. Hannibal showed that audacity and brilliant tactics can overcome numerical disadvantages. But I most respect those who cared for their soldiers, who led from the front, who shared in their hardships. A true commander earns loyalty not through fear, but through love and respect." General Hannibal smiled, a warm expression that creased his weathered face. His eyes, which had seen so much of war and human nature, regarded the boy with approval and something like recognition. "You understand something that many officers never learn," he said softly, stepping closer to examine the map and toy soldiers. "The soldier's heart is the greatest weapon in any army. A commander who treats his men as mere tools will never achieve the victories of one who understands that soldiers are human beings who respond to kindness, fairness, and personal example. Never forget that, young Alexander." The general then spent an hour with the boy, discussing military history and tactics. He told stories of Peter the Great, of battles fought in the snow and mud of the Baltic provinces, of sieges and naval engagements, of the forging of modern Russia through blood and determination. Young Alexander listened with absolute attention, absorbing every word, asking intelligent questions that impressed the old warrior. This conversation stayed with Alexander throughout his life, a guiding principle that would define his approach to military leadership. The idea that soldiers were not merely instruments of war, but human beings deserving of respect and care became central to his entire military philosophy. Years later, when Alexander commanded armies of his own, He would remember General Hannibal's words and put them into practice in ways that revolutionized Russian military leadership. As evening fell and candles were lit throughout the house, General Hannibal spoke with Alexander's father in private. Vasily Ivanovich listened carefully as his old comrade described the conversation with young Alexander. "That boy," the general said, standing before the fireplace with a glass of wine in his hand, "has something remarkable. His mind is extraordinary, yes, but more than that, he has understanding. He grasps the essential nature of command and warfare. I have known many officers, Vasily, and most of them learn only through hard experience what your son already understands through intuition and study. When he comes of age, you must see that he enters military service. That boy will one day be remembered in the annals of military history." Vasily Ivanovich felt his heart swell with pride and hope. He had worried that his son's frail health would prevent a military career, but seeing the determination and growth in the boy, hearing the assessment of a respected general, he began to believe that perhaps Alexander could indeed fulfill his dreams of service. From that evening forward, Vasily Ivanovich took a more active role in his son's education, sharing his own knowledge and experience, introducing Alexander to other military officers, and planning for the boy's future service. Chapter 2: The Young Soldier. The dawn of Alexander's military career came gently, like morning light spreading across the steppes. At the age of 17, in the year 1747, he enrolled as a musketeer in the Semyonovsky Life Guards Regiment. This was an elite unit, one of the oldest and most prestigious in the Imperial Russian Army, founded by Peter the Great himself during the struggle against the Streltsy. To serve in the Semyonovsky Regiment was an honor, and young Alexander wore his uniform with tremendous pride, though it hung somewhat loosely on his still slender frame. The Semyonovsky Regiment was garrisoned in St. Petersburg, the magnificent city that Peter the Great had built on the marshes at the mouth of the Neva River, Russia's window to the west. The city was still relatively young, less than 50 years old, but it had already become one of Europe's great capitals, with broad avenues, imposing palaces, and a cosmopolitan atmosphere that contrasted sharply with the more traditional character of Moscow. The barracks were simple and austere, with rows of narrow beds and the constant smell of boot polish and gun oil. The walls were whitewashed, the floors of plain wood worn smooth by countless boots. Each soldier had a small space for his belongings, a wooden chest at the foot of his bed, a peg on the wall for his uniform and equipment. The atmosphere was one of strict order and discipline, as befitted an elite guard unit. Alexander adapted quickly to military life, embracing its discipline and structure. While other young noblemen might have complained about the harsh conditions and rigorous training, comparing the simple barracks unfavorably to their family estates, Alexander thrived. The structured routine, the clear expectations, the focus on practical skills, all of this appealed to him deeply. He had found his calling, and he pursued it with characteristic intensity. He would wake before dawn, before even the sergeants began their rounds. In the gray pre-dawn light, he would practice his drill movements in the barracks courtyard, repeating the precise motions of loading and firing a musket, the choreography of formation movements, the handling of the bayonet. Other soldiers, waking to begin their day, would see his silhouette moving through the formations, and they began to recognize that this young nobleman was something unusual. He studied the musket as if it were a sacred text, learning every component, understanding how each piece functioned, practicing loading and firing until he could perform these actions blindfolded. He could disassemble and reassemble the weapon with his eyes closed, could diagnose and repair malfunctions, could estimate ranges and calculate trajectories. The musket was the fundamental weapon of 18th century infantry, and Alexander was determined to master it completely. He listened carefully to the veterans, those grizzled soldiers who had fought in previous wars. These men had experienced combat, had survived battles, had learned hard lessons about soldiering. Some were scarred from wounds. Others bore the marks of hard campaigning in their weathered faces and calloused hands. Alexander would sit with them in the evenings, asking questions, absorbing their wisdom like a sponge absorbs water. He learned about the realities of campaign life, about how armies moved and were supplied, about the importance of logistics and morale, about the countless small details that made the difference between an effective army and a mob in uniform. One old sergeant, Ivan Stepanovich, became something of a mentor to young Alexander. Ivan had served for over 20 years, had fought in multiple campaigns, and possessed a wealth of practical knowledge. He saw something special in the young officer and took him under his wing. "See here, young master," Ivan would say, sitting by the barrack stove on cold winter evenings while other soldiers played cards or told stories. "War in books is one thing. War in reality is another. In books, everything is clean and clear. In reality, it's muddy and confused. The army that can march faster, shoot straighter, and stay together when everything's going wrong, that's the army that wins." Alexander absorbed these lessons eagerly, understanding that practical wisdom from experienced soldiers was as valuable as theoretical knowledge from books. He began to develop his philosophy of warfare, combining classical military theory with the hard-won practical knowledge of veterans. He learned that soldiers needed good boots as much as they needed courage, that a well-fed army fought better than a hungry one, that clear orders simply expressed were better than elaborate plans that confused the troops. Years passed in training and study. Alexander advanced slowly but steadily through the junior officer ranks. He was not promoted quickly through family connections, as many noble officers were. His father, while influential, believed that his son should earn his rank through demonstrated competence. This suited Alexander perfectly. He wanted to be a professional soldier, not a drawing room officer who wore a uniform but knew nothing of real military service. In 1754, at the age of 24, Alexander was promoted to lieutenant. He continued to serve with the Semyonovsky Regiment, deepening his understanding of infantry tactics and the art of drilling soldiers. He developed his own ideas about military training, believing that soldiers should be taught to think and adapt rather than simply following rote commands. This was a revolutionary concept in an age when most armies treated common soldiers as little more than automatons who existed merely to stand in formation and fire on command. Alexander believed that initiative and intelligence at every level of command made armies more effective. He would explain to his soldiers why they were performing certain drills, how those movements would function in actual combat, what tactical purpose they served. Most officers of the time never explained anything to their men, believing that common soldiers were too stupid to understand and should simply obey without question. But Alexander found that soldiers who understood the purpose of their training performed better and adapted more readily to unexpected situations. He also began to develop his ideas about rapid warfare. Most European armies of the time moved ponderously, with enormous baggage trains carrying supplies, tents, and equipment. Armies would advance a few miles, then stop to set up elaborate camps. Sieges could last months or years. Battles, when they occurred, followed ritualized patterns with armies lined up facing each other in rigid formations. Alexander studied these conventions and began to question them. Why should armies move slowly? Why not attack immediately upon encountering the enemy rather than spending days or weeks maneuvering into textbook positions? Why besiege fortresses for months when a swift assault might take them in hours? These questions marked Alexander as an unconventional thinker, and some of his fellow officers considered his ideas impractical or even dangerous. But Alexander continued to develop his theories, always grounding them in historical examples and logical analysis. He studied the campaigns of commanders who had achieved great success through rapid movement and bold action. Alexander the Great's lightning campaigns, Caesar's incredible marching speed, Gustavus Adolphus's aggressive tactics. The world around Alexander was changing too. Russia was expanding, its borders pushing outward in all directions. To the west lay the great powers of Europe, Prussia under Frederick the Great, who had already established himself as one of the age's great military commanders, Austria under Empress Maria Theresa, France under Louis XV. To the south lay the Ottoman Empire, ancient and sprawling, still a significant military power despite being past its peak. To the east stretched the vast wilderness of Siberia and the frontiers with China. Russia sought to assert itself as a major power, and this ambition meant war. When the 7 Years' War erupted in 1756, it drew in all the major European powers in a complex web of alliances and rivalries. The war was fought on multiple continents in Europe, North America, India, and the seas between. In Europe, the main conflict pitted Prussia and Britain against France, Austria, Russia, and several smaller states. For Russia, the war was an opportunity to check Prussian power and assert Russian influence in European affairs. For Alexander, now a seasoned officer at 26 years old, this was his first taste of real warfare. All those years of training and study would now be tested against the harsh reality of battle. The theoretical knowledge from all those books in his father's library, the practical wisdom from veteran stories, the endless hours of drill and practice, all of it would now face the ultimate test of actual combat. Alexander's regiment marched westward in the spring of 1758, joining the vast Russian army assembling for the campaign against Frederick the Great's Prussia. The march itself was an education that no book could provide. Alexander observed how columns of soldiers moved across the landscape, how the rhythm of marching had to be maintained but not so rigidly that it exhausted the men, how supply wagons struggled through muddy roads, how the pace of advance was limited not by the speed of marching but by the slowest elements of the baggage train. He saw how armies consumed resources like fire consumes wood. Tens of thousands of soldiers and horses needed food, water, shelter, and supplies every day. The logistics of feeding and equipping an army on campaign were staggering. Whole regions could be stripped of food in days as the army passed through. Villages that supplied provisions to one side would be raided by the other. War created a wake of hunger and destruction that affected soldier and civilian alike. Alexander made mental notes of everything, always thinking about how things could be done more efficiently. Why did the baggage train need to be so enormous? Could soldiers carry more supplies themselves, reducing the need for wagons? Why did the army halt so frequently? Could they cover more ground each day through better planning and lighter loads? These questions would inform his later innovations in military logistics and movement. The first major battle Alexander witnessed was at Kunersdorf in August 1759. The night before the battle, as soldiers prepared their weapons and whispered prayers, Alexander walked among them. He was still only a junior officer, but he had already earned a reputation for competence and calm professionalism. He spoke quietly and confidently with the men, helping to settle the nerves of younger soldiers who had never experienced combat. He checked equipment, ensured that ammunition was properly distributed, and made certain that every man knew his role in the coming fight. That night, Alexander got little sleep. He lay on the ground rolled in his cloak, looking up at the stars, thinking about the coming battle. He felt fear. He was human after all, and only a fool feels no fear before combat. But he also felt a strange calm, a sense that this was what he had prepared for his entire life. All the training, all the study, all the self-discipline, it had been leading to this moment. When dawn broke on August 12, 1759, the Russian and Austrian forces faced the Prussian army across a landscape of hills and forests near the village of Kunersdorf. The morning was beautiful, with golden sunlight streaming through morning mist, birds singing in the trees, flowers blooming in the fields. It seemed impossible that such a peaceful landscape would soon become a place of violence and death. The sound of drums echoed across the battlefield as both armies prepared for combat. The rhythmic beating created a hypnotic, ominous atmosphere. The morning mist slowly lifted to reveal lines of infantry and cavalry positioned for combat. Regimental banners fluttered in the gentle breeze. Officers on horseback moved along the lines, speaking to their troops, making final adjustments to positions. Artillery crews prepared their cannons, measuring powder charges, stacking cannonballs, checking firing mechanisms. Alexander's heart beat quickly, adrenaline surging through his body, but his mind remained clear and focused. This was what he had prepared for all his life. Around him, soldiers stood in their ranks, muskets loaded, bayonets fixed, waiting for the order to advance. Some were veterans of previous battles, standing with calm readiness. Others were young men experiencing their first combat, trying to hide their fear, taking strength from the presence of their comrades. The battle began with an artillery bombardment. Prussian cannons opened fire, and the peaceful morning exploded into violence. Cannonballs whistled through the air, and when they struck, the impact was devastating. Alexander saw men torn apart, saw blood spray across the grass, saw soldiers trying to maintain their formation as comrades fell beside them. The sound was overwhelming. The thunder of cannons, the screams of wounded men, officers shouting orders, the crackle of musket fire. The Prussian army, led by Frederick the Great himself, was considered the finest in Europe. Frederick's soldiers were superbly trained, capable of firing their muskets faster than any other army, maneuvering with precision, maintaining discipline under fire. The Prussian attack came with devastating speed and power. Columns of infantry advanced across the battlefield, flags flying, drums beating, moving with mechanical precision. But the Russian and Austrian defenders stood firm. Alexander, with his regiment, waited as the Prussians advanced into range. The order to fire came, and hundreds of muskets discharged simultaneously. The smoke was so thick that Alexander could barely see more than a few yards. The smell of gunpowder was overwhelming. His ears rang from the constant roar of musket fire. Yet through the smoke and chaos, he could sense the rhythm of the battle, could understand what was happening, could make sense of the confusion. Throughout the day, the battle raged across the hills and forests of Kunersdorf. Frederick personally led multiple attacks, trying to break through the Russian-Austrian lines. His cavalry charged repeatedly, seeking to punch through and create a breakthrough. But the defenders held. The Russian infantry, fighting from prepared positions, repulsed each attack. The battle became a grinding match of attrition, with both sides suffering terrible casualties. Alexander remained calm throughout, leading his men with confidence and clarity. When officers fell, he stepped forward to direct their troops. When a section of the line wavered under heavy fire, he was there to steady them. He seemed to possess an almost supernatural ability to assess the battlefield situation, to know where his men needed to be positioned, when to advance and when to hold steady. The chaos of battle, which paralyzed some men and drove others to panic, somehow clarified his thinking. He found that his mind worked most clearly under pressure. As afternoon turned to evening, the Prussian attacks finally exhausted themselves. Frederick's army, having suffered catastrophic losses, began to withdraw from the field. The battle was over. The Russian and Austrian forces had held their ground and inflicted a devastating defeat on one of Europe's greatest military commanders. The Battle of Kunersdorf was one of the worst defeats of Frederick the Great's entire military career. He had lost perhaps half his army in killed, wounded, and missing soldiers. After the battle, Frederick was so distraught that he reportedly contemplated suicide. Only the loyalty of his officers and the slow pursuit by the Russian-Austrian forces prevented the complete destruction of the Prussian army. Alexander survived the battle unscathed, though many men around him fell. He had maintained his composure throughout the day's violence, had performed his duties with competence and courage, and had earned the respect of his superiors and the trust of his men. But the aftermath of battle affected him deeply. As sunset painted the sky red and gold, Alexander walked among the wounded and dying. The battlefield was a scene of horror. Thousands of men lay on the ground, crying out in pain, calling for water, begging for help. Medical care in the 18th century was primitive, and many wounded soldiers would die in the following days from infection or blood loss. The dead lay in rows, their faces waxen, their bodies already growing cold. Soldiers moved among them, searching for friends, closing the eyes of the dead, trying to comfort the dying. Alexander made a silent vow to himself that night. He would become the kind of commander who won battles but preserved the lives of his men as much as humanly possible. He would master the art of war so completely that he could defeat enemies through superior strategy and tactics, minimizing the terrible cost in blood. War was necessary, he accepted that, but the waste of life that came from poor planning or incompetent leadership was unacceptable. He would study, train, and prepare so thoroughly that when he commanded, his victories would be as complete as possible and his casualties as light as they could be. This first campaign taught Alexander valuable lessons that would shape his military philosophy for decades to come. He learned that speed and surprise could overcome numerical disadvantages. He learned that soldier morale was crucial to victory. Troops who trusted their commanders and believed in their cause fought harder and endured more than those who were uncertain or poorly led. He learned that taking care of his men, ensuring they were fed, clothed, and properly equipped, was not merely compassion but tactical necessity. A well-cared-for soldier fought better, marched farther, and remained loyal in the hardest trials. As the war continued through the early 1760s, Alexander served in several more campaigns. He participated in the capture of Berlin in 1760, witnessing the occupation of the Prussian capital by Russian forces. He served in Poland and Pomerania, gaining experience in different types of warfare and terrain. Each campaign added to his knowledge and refined his understanding of military operations. He was promoted to captain in 1761 at the age of 31, now commanding his own company. This was a significant step forward, giving him direct responsibility for the training and welfare of about 100 soldiers. He threw himself into this responsibility with characteristic intensity. His company became known for its exceptional drilling and discipline. Alexander insisted on rigorous training, but also made sure his men were properly fed and equipped. He would inspect their weapons personally, check the condition of their boots, ensure they had adequate clothing for the weather. His soldiers, seeing that their captain genuinely cared for their welfare, responded with fierce loyalty and dedication. The 7 Years' War finally ended in 1763 with the Peace of Hubertusburg. Russia had achieved its main war objectives, checking Prussian expansion and asserting itself as a major European power. Alexander, now 33 years old and a decorated veteran, returned to garrison duty in St. Petersburg. He had survived multiple campaigns, had seen extensive combat, and had established himself as a capable and promising officer. But his greatest achievements still lay ahead in the distant future. Chapter 3: The Polish Campaigns and Growing Reputation. The years immediately following the 7 Years' War were relatively peaceful, giving Alexander time to reflect on his experiences and continue developing his military theories. He was promoted to major in 1762 and then to lieutenant colonel in 1763, steadily advancing through the middle ranks of the officer corps. These were years of professional development, where the lessons of war were digested and transformed into systematic knowledge. Alexander spent much of his time during these years working on training methods for his regiment. He had become convinced that the standard European method of military training was fundamentally flawed. Most armies drilled their soldiers endlessly in precise parade ground formations, emphasizing visual uniformity and the ability to perform elaborate maneuvers that looked impressive to civilian observers but had limited battlefield utility. Soldiers were trained to fire volleys in perfect synchronization, to march in step with mechanical precision, to maintain formation at all costs. But Alexander had seen in combat that battlefields were chaotic, unpredictable environments where parade ground precision quickly dissolved into smoke and confusion. He had seen that the army that could adapt to chaos, that could maintain cohesion when plans fell apart, that could take initiative at every level of command, that was the army that won battles. So he began to train his soldiers differently. His training emphasized practical combat skills over visual elegance. He had his soldiers practice loading and firing their muskets at the maximum practical rate rather than the slower, more precise parade ground rate. He drilled them in advancing under simulated fire conditions, running forward and dropping into firing positions, dealing with obstacles and rough terrain. He taught them to fight at night, something most armies never practiced. He emphasized bayonet combat, believing that cold steel was more decisive than extended firefights. Perhaps most controversially, Alexander encouraged his soldiers to think for themselves. He would explain the tactical purpose of different formations and maneuvers, would have his junior officers make decisions during training exercises, would reward initiative and intelligent adaptation rather than punishing any deviation from rigid procedure. His fellow officers often criticized this approach, arguing that common soldiers were too stupid to think and would become undisciplined if given too much freedom. But Alexander's results spoke for themselves. His units consistently outperformed others in exercises and competitions. Alexander also worked on his own physical conditioning during these years. Despite his earlier health problems, he had developed into a remarkably hardy individual through years of self-discipline and training. He lived simply, almost ascetically, eschewing the luxuries that his rank and family wealth could have provided. He slept on a hard bed or even on the floor, believing that soft living made soldiers weak. He ate simple food and drank water rather than wine or vodka. He rose early and exercised daily. He deliberately exposed himself to discomfort, cold water, harsh weather, long marches to maintain his physical toughness. This lifestyle was not mere eccentricity. Alexander believed deeply that a commander must be physically capable of enduring everything he asked of his soldiers. If he expected his men to march 20 miles in a day, he must be able to march 20 miles. If he expected them to sleep on the ground in cold weather, he must do the same. This philosophy of leading by personal example would become one of the defining characteristics of his command style. In 1768, Russia went to war with the Ottoman Empire, beginning a conflict that would last 6 years and would provide Alexander with crucial opportunities to demonstrate his growing mastery of warfare. The Turkish frontier was a harsh environment, with vast distances, extreme weather, and a formidable enemy. The Ottoman Empire, though past its peak of power that had made it the terror of Europe in the 16th and 17th centuries, remained a significant military power with experienced soldiers and strong fortifications. The war began over Russian expansion in Poland and Russian support for Orthodox Christians in Ottoman territories. Empress Catherine II, who had come to power in 1762, was an ambitious ruler determined to expand Russian power and influence. The Ottoman Sultan, seeing Russian expansion as a threat to Ottoman interests, declared war in October 1768. Alexander was assigned to the Army of the Danube, serving under the overall command of Count Pyotr Rumyantsev, one of Russia's finest generals and a man who would become Alexander's mentor and role model. Rumyantsev was himself an innovator, favoring aggressive tactics and rapid maneuvers over the slow, methodical siege warfare that characterized much European military practice of the era. Under Rumyantsev's command, Alexander would learn advanced concepts of operational warfare, how to coordinate multiple columns over large distances, how to achieve strategic surprise, how to exploit enemy mistakes for maximum effect. The campaign required crossing the vast steppe lands of southern Russia, where summer heat could be brutal and winter cold equally unforgiving. Alexander led his troops on long marches, always maintaining strict discipline but also ensuring his men were properly supplied and cared for. He paid attention to details that other officers often overlooked: the condition of the soldiers' feet, the quality of their food, the maintenance of their equipment. These seemingly small matters, Alexander understood, determined whether an army could fight effectively or would collapse from exhaustion and disease before meeting the enemy. During this campaign, Alexander began to be noticed by higher command for his exceptional competence and energy. He was everywhere at once, inspecting supply depots, drilling troops, reconnoitering terrain, planning operations. He seemed to need little sleep, could work for long hours without apparent fatigue, and maintained absolute clarity of thought even under stress. His superiors began to assign him increasingly important and difficult tasks, knowing that he would execute them thoroughly and efficiently. In 1770, at the age of 40, Alexander fought in the Battle of Kozluji, a significant engagement where Count Rumyantsev's forces defeated a much larger Ottoman army. This battle was a textbook example of the innovative tactics that Rumyantsev favored and that Alexander would later refine further. Rather than forming his army into a single massive formation, Rumyantsev divided his forces into several mobile squares that could support each other while maintaining the ability to maneuver independently. This gave the Russian army tremendous flexibility, allowing it to respond to Ottoman attacks from multiple directions while maintaining cohesive defensive formations. Alexander commanded one of these divisional squares, leading his troops with confidence and tactical acumen. When the Ottoman cavalry charged his formation, his soldiers stood firm, delivering devastating volleys of musket fire that broke the charge. When openings appeared in the Ottoman lines, Alexander was quick to exploit them, pushing forward aggressively. His performance in the battle earned him commendation from Rumyantsev and promotion to colonel in 1770. The following years of the Ottoman War saw Alexander participating in numerous engagements and sieges along the Danube frontier. He was learning the art of siege warfare, understanding how to assess fortress defenses, where to place artillery for maximum effect, how to organize assaults on fortified positions. But even as he mastered traditional siege techniques, he was developing ideas about how to conduct sieges more quickly and efficiently than conventional methods allowed. In 1772, Alexander was promoted to Major General at the relatively young age of 42. This promotion reflected his proven abilities and the confidence his superiors had in his leadership. He was given command of a brigade and then a division, now responsible for thousands of soldiers and the coordination of complex military operations. The increase in responsibility suited him perfectly. He had always thought on an operational level, planning movements and operations, and now he had the authority to implement his ideas more fully. In 1773, while still engaged in operations against the Ottomans, Alexander faced a different and in some ways more challenging assignment, helping to suppress the Pugachev rebellion. This massive uprising, which began in the Ural region of southeastern Russia, was led by Yemelyan Pugachev, a Don Cossack who claimed to be the dead Tsar Peter III and promised to free the peasants from serfdom, reduce taxes, and restore traditional privileges to the Cossacks. The rebellion spread with alarming speed, attracting Cossacks, peasants, factory workers, and various ethnic groups, Bashkirs, Tatars, Kazakhs, all of whom had grievances against the Russian imperial government. At its height, the rebellion controlled vast territories and threatened major cities. The scale and intensity of the uprising shocked the Russian government and threatened the stability of Catherine's reign. Alexander was dispatched to help suppress the rebellion in early 1774. This was a different kind of warfare than he had experienced against foreign enemies. These were Russian subjects, many of them desperately poor and driven to rebellion by genuine grievances, crushing taxation, brutal treatment by landlords, loss of traditional rights and freedoms. The war against the Ottomans was a straightforward conflict between nations, but the suppression of an internal rebellion raised difficult moral questions. Alexander approached the campaign with his characteristic thoroughness, but also with an awareness of the human tragedy involved. He understood that many rebels were not hardened revolutionaries, but ordinary people pushed to desperation. He would defeat them because that was his duty as a soldier and officer of the crown, but he would show mercy when possible and work to end the conflict quickly to minimize suffering on all sides. He moved swiftly and decisively against rebel forces. Using his by now well-honed tactics of rapid marches and sudden attacks, he engaged and defeated rebel armies before they could concentrate their full strength. His soldiers were well-trained and disciplined, and they executed complex maneuvers with precision. In a series of sharp engagements throughout 1774, Alexander's forces defeated rebel armies and helped restore order to the troubled regions. But Alexander also showed unusual clemency for the time. When rebel forces surrendered, he treated prisoners humanely rather than ordering mass executions, which was common practice in suppressing rebellions. He understood that many rebels were simple people caught up in desperate circumstances, and that excessive brutality would only create more resentment and future problems. He offered pardons to rebels who laid down their arms and returned to their homes. This combination of military effectiveness and relative mercy helped bring the region back under government control without creating an endless cycle of revenge and further rebellion. The Pugachev rebellion was finally crushed in late 1774 when Pugachev himself was captured and brought to Moscow in an iron cage for public execution. The successful suppression of the rebellion enhanced Alexander's reputation significantly. Empress Catherine II herself took notice of this capable general who combined tactical brilliance with the ability to achieve objectives quickly and efficiently. Catherine, known to history as Catherine the Great, was one of the most capable rulers in Russian history, an enlightened despot who expanded Russian territory, promoted education and the arts, and sought to modernize Russia according to Western European models. She valued competent subordinates highly and was always on the lookout for capable administrators and military commanders. With the rebellion crushed, Alexander returned to the Ottoman frontier in late 1774, where war still continued although both sides were exhausted and moving toward peace. He led successful campaigns in Bulgaria, demonstrating the innovative tactics that would become his signature. Rather than besieging enemy fortresses in the traditional manner, which could take months or even years, Alexander favored swift reconnaissance followed by rapid, decisive assault. His method was to carefully study a fortress's defenses, identify weak points, prepare his troops thoroughly with detailed briefings and rehearsals, and then strike with overwhelming speed and violence. The assault itself was meticulously planned and coordinated, with different units assigned specific objectives, movements synchronized, and every contingency prepared for. The result was that fortresses fell in days or even hours that might have withstood traditional sieges for months. One evening, as the sun set over the Danube, painting the river red and gold, Alexander stood on a hill overlooking the fortress of Turtukai, a significant Ottoman stronghold. His officers gathered around him, and he explained his plan for the assault. His voice was calm and methodical as he pointed out the fortress's defensive features and the weak points they would exploit. He described how the assault columns would approach, where the ladders would be placed, what each unit would do once inside the walls, how reserves would be committed to exploit success. Some of his officers were skeptical. The fortress looked formidable, with high walls, numerous bastions, and a large garrison of experienced Ottoman soldiers. Traditional doctrine said that fortresses should be besieged, bombarded until their walls were breached, and only then assaulted. But Alexander had a different vision. He believed that speed and surprise could overcome strong defenses, that a well-planned assault executed with determination could succeed where slow siege operations would fail. The assault on Turtukai came on the night of May 17, 1773. The darkness was alive with tension as thousands of Russian soldiers moved silently into position around the fortress. Alexander had ordered absolute silence. No talking, no coughing, weapons and equipment secured so they wouldn't rattle. The Ottoman garrison, believing themselves safe behind strong walls, were not expecting an immediate assault and had posted only normal guard details. At Alexander's signal, a single rocket fired into the night sky, the assault began. Russian soldiers surged forward from multiple directions simultaneously. Ladders clattered against stone walls, and men began climbing with courage born of excellent training and absolute confidence in their commander. The Ottoman defenders, caught by surprise, struggled to respond effectively. By the time they realized what was happening and began to mount organized resistance, Russian soldiers were already scaling the walls in multiple places. The fortress fell with surprising speed. The Ottoman garrison, overwhelmed by the ferocity and precision of the assault, surrendered after several hours of fighting. Alexander had achieved in one night what might have taken other commanders months of siege operations. The success at Turdukai validated his tactical theories and established a pattern he would repeat throughout his career. Similar successes followed at Kozluja and other strongholds. Each victory added to Alexander's growing legend and refined his tactical methods. He was developing a reputation as an aggressive, innovative commander who achieved remarkable results through unconventional tactics. The Russian high command took increasing notice of this general who seemed to win battles faster and more decisively than his colleagues. The Ottoman War finally ended in 1774 with the Treaty of Kukuk-Kinarka, a significant victory for Russia that expanded Russian territory along the Black Sea coast and established Russian influence in the region. For his services during the war, Alexander received the Order of St. George Second Class, one of Russia's highest military honors. At 44 years old, he was becoming one of Russia's most distinguished generals, with a proven record of success and an innovative approach to warfare that was beginning to influence Russian military doctrine more broadly. Chapter 4: The Crimea and Further Development. Following the Ottoman War, Alexander entered a new phase of his career. In 1778, at the age of 48, he was appointed to command in the Crimea, which Russia had recently annexed. The Crimean Khanate had been an independent state under Ottoman suzerainty for centuries, but Russian pressure and the terms of the 1774 treaty had forced it into independence as a step toward eventual Russian annexation. In 1783, Catherine the Great would formally annex the Crimea, making it a province of the Russian Empire. This assignment was both military and diplomatic, requiring not just tactical skill, but also political acumen and cultural sensitivity. The Crimean Tatars, who had lived in the region for centuries, were now Russian subjects, and managing this transition required delicacy and understanding. The local population was predominantly Muslim, with its own cultural traditions, social structures, and historical grievances. Simply imposing Russian authority through force would create endless resistance and instability. Alexander approached this challenge, as he approached all challenges, with thorough preparation and careful thought. Before even arriving in the Crimea, he studied the history and culture of the Tatars extensively. He learned about their military traditions, social organization, religious practices, and historical relationship with Russia and the Ottoman Empire. He studied the geography of the region, memorizing maps and consulting with people who had traveled there. When he arrived to take up his command, Alexander immediately set about establishing good relations with the local population. He met with Tatar leaders, showing respect for their traditions and listening carefully to their concerns. He made it clear that he represented Russian authority but was not there to destroy Tatar culture or oppress the population. He worked to integrate Tatar irregular cavalry into the Russian military structure, recognizing their value as light cavalry who knew the local terrain intimately. The Tatar cavalry were superb light horsemen, skilled at reconnaissance, raiding, and harassing enemy forces. They could ride for days across the steppe with minimal supplies, could navigate by stars and landmarks, knew every trail and water source in the region. Alexander valued these skills highly and worked to incorporate Tatar units into his forces in ways that utilized their strengths. This approach contrasted with many Russian officials who viewed the Tatars with suspicion and tried to suppress their military traditions. The Crimean assignment gave Alexander time to further develop his military theories. He continued to refine his training methods, now with the authority of a senior commander to implement them across larger formations. He wrote extensively about tactics, training, and military leadership, though he expressed his thoughts in simple, direct language rather than academic jargon. His writing style reflected his character: straightforward, practical, focused on results rather than theory for its own sake. During this period, Alexander began to articulate the maxims and principles that would later be collected as his science of victory. These included memorable phrases like, "Train hard, fight easy," emphasizing that rigorous, realistic training made actual combat less difficult by comparison. "The bullet is a fool, the bayonet is a hero," arguing that decisive victory came from close combat with cold steel rather than extended firefights that consumed ammunition and allowed enemies to escape. "Achieve surprise, attack unexpectedly," stressing the importance of speed and unpredictability in military operations. "Work with your arms, not your legs," meaning fight aggressively rather than retreating, press forward rather than pulling back, pursue until the last moment, never letting a defeated enemy escape to fight another day, but following through to complete the destruction of enemy forces. These aphorisms seemed simple, even crude, but they contained deep tactical wisdom distilled from decades of experience. Alexander expressed them in language that the common soldier could understand and remember. He believed that every soldier should understand the reasons behind tactical decisions, that blind obedience was inferior to intelligent initiative. He also developed a comprehensive training program that he called the Science of Victory. This program emphasized three key principles. 1. Speed, glasmer the ability to assess situations quickly and make rapid decisions. Alexander believed that speed of decision and action was a weapon in itself, that armies that moved and reacted quickly had enormous advantages over slower opponents. 2. Impact, Navasdany the psychological and physical shock of aggressive assault. Alexander believed that violent, determined attacks could overwhelm stronger defenses through sheer momentum and the psychological effect on defenders. 3. Onslaught, Pritisk the continuous application of pressure, never giving the enemy time to recover or reorganize. Once an attack began, it should continue relentlessly until victory was achieved. These principles, combined with his emphasis on rigorous training and care for soldiers' welfare, created a military doctrine that was revolutionary for its time. Most European armies still fought according to principles established decades earlier, with rigid linear formations, slow movements, and cautious tactics. Alexander's approach emphasized flexibility, speed, aggression, and the intelligent use of terrain and surprise. During his time in the Crimea, Alexander also continued to develop his personal habits of discipline and simplicity. He maintained his practice of rising extremely early, often before 4 a.m., to begin his day's work. He slept on a simple camp bed or even on the floor, wrapped in his military cloak. He ate plain soldiers' rations rather than the elaborate meals that generals typically enjoyed. He wore a simple uniform without excessive decoration, believing that a soldier's worth came from his actions, not his appearance. These habits were partly natural to his austere temperament, but they were also calculated to set an example for his troops. Alexander believed deeply that soldiers responded better to commanders who shared their hardships than to those who lived in luxury while their men suffered. By living simply and sharing the same basic conditions as his soldiers, he earned their loyalty and respect in ways that no amount of formal authority could achieve. He also maintained his physical fitness rigorously despite his advancing age. He would walk or ride for hours inspecting positions and terrain. He would participate in training exercises alongside his soldiers. He deliberately exposed himself to harsh weather, believing that comfort made soldiers weak. This physical toughness would serve him well in future campaigns, allowing him to endure hardships that would have broken younger, less conditioned men. In 1787, Russia once again went to war with the Ottoman Empire. Sultan Abdul Hamid I, encouraged by France and Britain who wanted to check Russian expansion, declared war on Russia in August 1787. For Russia, this was another opportunity to expand southward toward the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. For Alexander, now 57 years old and a lieutenant general, it was an opportunity to demonstrate all the tactical innovations he had developed over decades of study and experience. The war that followed would showcase Alexander's mastery of warfare and would include some of the most celebrated achievements of his entire career. He was given command of critical sectors along the southern frontier, responsible for thousands of troops and the defense of newly conquered Russian territories. The stage was set for the campaigns that would make him legendary. Chapter 5: The Second Ottoman War and the Storm of Ochakov. The Russo-Turkish War of 1787 to 1792 would prove to be one of the most significant conflicts of Alexander Suvorov's career, providing him with opportunities to demonstrate the full range of his tactical innovations and strategic thinking. The war was fought along Russia's southern frontier, from the Danube River to the Caucasus Mountains, across vast distances and varied terrain. Alexander was assigned to command forces in the Kinben Peninsula, a strategic position at the mouth of the Dnieper River. The Ottomans, seeking to reclaim territories lost in the previous war, landed a large force in the peninsula in the autumn of 1787, hoping to establish a foothold from which they could threaten Russian positions along the Black Sea coast. The Battle of Kinben, fought on October 1, 1787, showcased Alexander's tactical brilliance and personal courage. The Ottoman landing force numbered perhaps 5,000 well-equipped soldiers supported by naval gunfire. Alexander's defending force was considerably smaller, but he made up for this disadvantage through superior positioning and tactics. Rather than attempting to oppose the Ottoman landing directly, which would have exposed his smaller force to naval bombardment and overwhelming numbers, Alexander allowed the Ottomans to come ashore and move inland away from their naval support. Then, when the Ottoman force was most vulnerable, still disorganized from the landing, separated from their ships, not yet having established proper defensive positions, Alexander struck with a swift, violent assault from multiple directions. The attack came with such sudden fury that the Ottoman forces were thrown into confusion. Alexander personally led part of the assault, riding at the head of his troops despite being 57 years old. During the fighting, he was wounded twice, once by a bullet that struck him in the side and once by a bayonet that pierced his arm. But he remained in command, rallying his troops and directing the battle even as blood stained his uniform. The Ottoman force was overwhelmed and destroyed. Some escaped back to their ships, but the majority were killed or captured. Alexander had won a complete victory against superior numbers through superior tactics and the excellent training of his soldiers. But the personal cost was significant. His wounds, while not life-threatening, were painful and required weeks of recovery. Empress Catherine, when she learned of the victory and Alexander's wounds, sent him a personal letter of congratulations and concern. "You have once again proven yourself a hero," she wrote, "but I must insist that you take better care of yourself. Russia cannot afford to lose such a valuable general to excessive bravery." Alexander, reading the letter from his recovery bed, smiled. Taking care of himself had never been his priority. Achieving victory and caring for his soldiers, those were what mattered. Once recovered from his wounds, Alexander resumed active command. In 1788, he was assigned to participate in the Siege of Ochakov, a major Ottoman fortress on the Black Sea coast. The siege was under the overall command of Prince Grigory Potemkin, one of Catherine's favorites and one of the most powerful men in Russia. Potemkin was a complex figure, brilliant but temperamental, capable of great accomplishments but also prone to indecision and delay. The siege of Ochakov dragged on for months, from the summer of 1788 into the winter. The Ottoman garrison was strong and well supplied, and they defended stubbornly. Potemkin seemed unable or unwilling to order a decisive assault, preferring to continue the bombardment and hope the fortress would eventually surrender. Meanwhile, the besieging Russian army suffered from disease, exposure, and declining morale as winter approached. Alexander, commanding a corps that held part of the siege lines, chafed at the slow progress and the unnecessary suffering his soldiers were enduring. He believed that a determined assault could take the fortress and spare his soldiers the misery of campaigning through another winter. He repeatedly urged Potemkin to authorize a general assault, arguing his case with typical directness and providing detailed plans for how the assault should be conducted. Other generals advised caution, arguing that an assault would cost too many lives and might fail given the fortress's strong defenses. But Alexander countered that continuing the siege through winter would also cost lives, to disease, cold, and accidents, and would achieve nothing faster than a well-executed assault. Better to risk a single day of heavy fighting than to lose men gradually over months of siege. Finally, in December 1788, with winter winds howling off the Black Sea and snow beginning to fall, Potemkin gave the order for a general assault. The date was set for December 17th. Alexander was given command of one of the main assault columns, responsible for attacking a critical section of the fortress walls. The days before the assault were spent in intensive preparation. Alexander personally inspected every ladder that would be used for scaling the walls, tested ropes, checked the distribution of ammunition, spoke with officers to ensure everyone understood their assignments. He had his soldiers rehearse the assault repeatedly, practicing the movements they would make, the signals they would follow, how they would support each other once inside the fortress. On the night of December 16th, Alexander slept briefly, wrapped in his cloak on the frozen ground alongside his soldiers. He woke well before dawn, the stars still bright in the winter sky. He walked among his troops in the darkness, speaking quietly with them, his breath creating clouds in the frigid air. "Today we end this siege," he told them. "Today we take the fortress and go into winter quarters where it's warm. Follow me, fight bravely, and by tonight we'll be victorious." The assault began at dawn on December 17th, 1788. The winter morning was bitterly cold, with temperatures well below freezing and a harsh wind blowing off the Black Sea. The ground was frozen hard as iron, covered with a layer of snow and ice. The sky was gray and threatening, promising more snow to come. At the signal, thousands of Russian soldiers surged forward across the frozen ground toward Ochakov's walls. Artillery had breached sections of the wall, but the Ottoman defenders had worked through the night to build barriers behind the breaches and had positioned troops to defend every vulnerable point. As the Russian troops advanced, Ottoman cannons and muskets opened fire, and men began to fall on the frozen ground. Alexander led his column personally, riding his horse through the storm of shot and shell. His officers begged him to stay back, to direct the assault from a safer position, but he refused. "The soldiers need to see their commander," he said. "They need to know I share their danger." His white hair and simple uniform made him easily recognizable, and soldiers throughout the attacking force drew courage from seeing their general at the front of the assault. The fighting was brutal and chaotic. Russian soldiers clambered over breaches in the walls, fighting hand-to-hand with Ottoman defenders. Other sections scaled intact walls using ladders, climbing under fire, losing men who fell from the ladders to the frozen ground below. Once inside the fortress, the battle became a confused melee in the streets and buildings, with small groups of soldiers fighting desperately in close quarters. Alexander was in the thick of the fighting throughout the day, his sword drawn, personally leading assaults on key positions. At one point, his horse was shot from under him and he continued on foot. His uniform was torn and stained with mud and blood, some his own from minor wounds, some from soldiers he had helped or defended. But he never stopped moving, never stopped directing the battle, never showed any sign of fear or uncertainty. By midday, despite fierce resistance from the Ottoman garrison, Russian forces had gained control of most of the fortress. The Ottoman commander recognized that further resistance was futile and ordered his remaining forces to attempt to escape toward their ships anchored in the harbor. But Alexander had anticipated this and had positioned forces to cut off the escape routes. By evening, the battle was over. The fortress of Ochakov, after months of siege, had fallen in a single day of intense fighting. The cost had been high. Thousands of soldiers on both sides lay dead or wounded in the frozen streets of the fortress. The cold made caring for the wounded difficult, and many who might have survived in warmer weather died from the combination of their wounds and exposure. Alexander walked among the wounded afterward, his face grim and tired. He had achieved victory, but he took no joy in the suffering that victory required. The capture of Ochakov was celebrated throughout Russia as a great victory. Empress Catherine awarded medals and honors to the participants. But for Alexander, the most important outcome was not the glory but the end of the siege. His soldiers could now go into winter quarters, could rest and recover in relative warmth and comfort, rather than continuing to suffer in the siege lines through the depths of winter. The fall of Ochakov opened the way for further Russian advances along the Black Sea coast. In the campaigns of 1789, Alexander would achieve even more remarkable victories that would establish him as one of history's great military commanders. Chapter 6: Rymnik and Ishmael, the Height of Glory. The campaigns of 1789 brought Alexander Suvorov to the peak of his military career, with victories that would be remembered as long as military history is studied. These achievements came not merely from tactical skill, but from the perfect integration of all the elements Alexander had spent decades developing. Superior training, rapid movement, aggressive tactics, care for soldiers' welfare, and inspirational leadership. The year began with Alexander in command of a division operating in Moldavia, coordinating with Austrian forces in a coalition against the Ottoman Empire. The strategic situation was complex, with Ottoman armies threatening to overwhelm the Austrians and potentially reverse all of Russia's gains from earlier campaigns. The Austrian commanders, trained in the cautious, methodical warfare typical of 18th century Central Europe, found themselves unable to cope with the more aggressive Ottoman tactics. In September 1789, a large Ottoman army, estimates vary but perhaps numbering 100,000 men, threatened to overwhelm an Austrian force under Prince Josias of Coburg. The Austrian commander sent urgent messages to Alexander requesting immediate assistance. The situation was desperate. The Austrians were outnumbered and demoralized, having suffered several defeats. Without help, they would likely be destroyed, and the entire Russian position in the region would be threatened. Alexander received the request on September 19th. He immediately assessed the situation, calculating distances, marching times, and the condition of his own forces. His division numbered only about 6,500 men. a tiny force compared to the massive Ottoman army threatening the Austrians. Most commanders would have considered the situation hopeless or would have advanced cautiously, taking time to coordinate carefully and prepare thoroughly. But Alexander saw opportunity where others saw only risk. He understood that speed could compensate for small numbers, that the Ottomans would not expect a small Russian force to advance aggressively toward a much larger army, that swift action could catch the enemy off balance and create opportunities for victory. He made his decision instantly. He would march immediately to join the Austrians and would attack the Ottoman army regardless of the odds. The march to Rymnik was extraordinary. Alexander covered over 60 miles in 2.5 days through difficult terrain, pushing his soldiers to their physical limits but also ensuring they had adequate rest breaks and food. He drove them hard but took care of them, understanding the balance between speed and exhaustion. His soldiers, who trusted their commander absolutely, responded magnificently to the demand. They knew that when Suvorov pushed them hard, it was for good reason, not arbitrary cruelty. They arrived at the Austrian position on September 21st, and Alexander immediately met with Prince Josias to coordinate their forces and plan the attack. The Austrian officers were astounded that Alexander intended to attack immediately. "But General," one of them said, "we are vastly outnumbered. Should we not await reinforcements? Should we not prepare more thoroughly?" Alexander shook his head firmly. "The enemy expects us to be cautious. They think we will delay and maneuver. That expectation is our advantage. We attack tomorrow at dawn before they realize we're strong enough to threaten them." He spent the remainder of the day and much of the night planning the assault in meticulous detail. He divided the combined Russian-Austrian force into several columns, each with a specific objective and route of advance. He coordinated timing so that all columns would strike simultaneously, creating maximum confusion among the Ottoman forces. He ensured that every officer understood not just his own assignment but the overall plan, so they could adapt if circumstances changed. On the morning of September 22, 1789, as dawn broke over the valley of the Rymnik River, Alexander launched his attack. The plan was brilliant in its conception and flawless in its execution. He divided his forces into several columns, each striking from a different direction, creating the impression of a much larger army attacking from multiple positions simultaneously. The Ottoman forces, despite their vast numerical superiority, were caught off balance. Their commanders had been expecting a defensive battle, perhaps some cautious maneuvering, certainly not an aggressive multi-pronged assault by a numerically inferior force. The attack came from unexpected directions, with columns appearing where Ottoman scouts had reported no enemy forces. The Ottoman command structure, struggling to respond to attacks from multiple directions, began to break down. Alexander was everywhere at once during the battle, riding from one critical point to another, directing movements, committing reserves at precisely the right moments, encouraging troops, making instantaneous decisions that kept the offensive momentum going. When one column encountered unexpected resistance, he personally led reinforcements to support them. When an opportunity appeared in the Ottoman lines, he immediately exploited it, pushing forces through the gap before the enemy could react. The battle raged throughout the day across the hills and valleys around the Rymnik River. Despite the Ottoman army's enormous numerical advantage, the superior training and leadership of the Russian-Austrian forces gradually prevailed. Ottoman formations, attacked from multiple directions and unable to concentrate their strength effectively, began to waver and break. By late afternoon, the Ottoman army's cohesion had collapsed entirely. What had been an organized military force dissolved into a panicked retreat. Thousands of Ottoman soldiers fled the battlefield, abandoning their weapons, supplies, and equipment. Alexander, true to his principle of pursuing until the last moment, sent cavalry after them to prevent any organized retreat, to ensure that the Ottoman army was not just defeated but shattered as an effective military force. By evening, the victory was complete. The Ottoman army had suffered catastrophic losses, perhaps 15,000 to 20,000 casualties, including many senior officers. The survivors were scattered across miles of countryside, no longer a cohesive fighting force. Meanwhile, Russian-Austrian casualties, though significant, were relatively light considering the scale of the battle and the enormous disparity in numbers. Alexander had achieved one of history's most lopsided victories, defeating a force perhaps 4 times larger than his own through superior tactics, training, and leadership. The Battle of Rymnik immediately became legendary throughout Europe. Military experts studied it, trying to understand how such a small force had defeated such a large one. The answer lay in all the elements Alexander had spent decades perfecting: rapid movement to achieve surprise, aggressive tactics that seized initiative, multi-directional attacks that confused enemy command, superior training that allowed complex coordination, and inspirational leadership that motivated soldiers to perform at their absolute best. For this achievement, Empress Catherine awarded Alexander the title of Count Suvorov Rymniksky, making him a hereditary member of the Russian nobility. The Austrian Emperor Joseph II made him a Count of the Holy Roman Empire. He received Russia's highest military honors, including the Order of St. George, First Class, given only to generals who had achieved extraordinary victories. Suddenly, at age 59, Alexander Suvorov was not just a respected general but a celebrated hero throughout Europe. But the greatest campaign of the war was still to come. In late 1790, Alexander was ordered to capture the fortress of Ishmael, one of the strongest Ottoman positions remaining and a key obstacle to Russian control of the lower Danube region. Ishmael was an immensely strong fortification. The fortress sat on the Danube River, with thick walls up to 30 feet high in places, numerous bastions projecting from the walls to allow defensive fire along the wall faces, and a large garrison of 35,000 experienced Ottoman soldiers. The fortress had been strengthened over years and was considered by military experts to be virtually impregnable. One of those fortresses that could only be taken through long siege operations that might last months or even years. Previous Russian attempts to capture Ishmael had failed. When Alexander arrived to take command of the siege in early December 1790, morale among the besieging forces was low. Officers doubted that the fortress could be taken by assault and advocated for withdrawing into winter quarters and resuming the siege the following spring. The winter was approaching, and conditions would only get worse. Alexander studied the fortress carefully for several days, examining every angle of its defenses, observing the movements of the garrison, analyzing where the defenses might be weakest. He consulted with engineers, artillery officers, and infantry commanders. He walked the entire perimeter of the siege lines, looking at the fortress from every direction, his sharp eyes noting details that others missed. Then he made his decision. The fortress would be taken by storm. Not in the spring, not after months more of siege, but immediately. His officers protested. The fortress was too strong, the garrison too large, the season too advanced. An assault would cost thousands of lives and might fail. Better to wait, to be cautious, to follow conventional military wisdom. But Alexander overruled them all. He explained his reasoning. Continuing the siege through winter would cost lives to disease and exposure without achieving anything. The garrison would use the time to strengthen their defenses further. Morale among the besieging troops would continue to deteriorate. Better to attempt one decisive assault now, accepting the risk of high casualties but also offering the possibility of quick victory. He set the assault for December 22nd, giving himself less than 2 weeks to prepare. Those 2 weeks saw an intensity of activity that astounded even the veteran soldiers who had served under Suvorov before. Alexander organized training exercises where soldiers practiced storming mock-ups of the fortress walls, rehearsing exactly what they would do, where they would go, how they would support each other. He divided his assault force into multiple columns, each with specific objectives, and had them rehearse their movements repeatedly until every man knew his role perfectly. He also issued his famous proclamation to the fortress commander, "I am here with my army. 24 hours to decide. Surrender and save lives, or resist and face the storm. The fortress will fall regardless, but I wish to spare unnecessary bloodshed." The Ottoman commander, confident in his strong position and large garrison, refused. He sent back a defiant message. "The Danube will reverse its flow before Ishmael falls." Alexander spent the night before the assault making final preparations and visiting his troops. He walked among the soldiers, speaking calmly with them, his presence reassuring and inspiring. "Tomorrow we take the fortress," he told them simply. "Follow your officers, remember your training, and show the courage I know you possess. We will succeed because we are better trained, better led, and we fight for a just cause." He slept briefly in his tent, wrapped in his cloak, and woke well before dawn on December 22, 1790. The winter morning was bitterly cold, with snow on the ground and more clouds threatening. A harsh wind blew off the river, making the cold even more penetrating. It was weather that tested human endurance simply to be outside, let alone to fight. The assault began in darkness at 5:30 in the morning. Alexander had divided his forces into 9 assault columns, each assigned to attack specific sections of the fortress walls simultaneously. The plan called for coordinated attacks from all directions at once, overwhelming the defenders' ability to concentrate their forces and respond effectively. Thousands of Russian soldiers advanced across the frozen ground toward the fortress walls in the pre-dawn darkness. The snow crunched under their feet, and their breath created clouds in the frigid air. Each soldier carried scaling ladders, axes, ropes, and other equipment needed to breach the defenses. They moved in disciplined silence until they reached the fortress's outer works, and then the battle exploded into violent chaos. Ottoman defenders, alerted by the approaching columns, opened fire with cannons and muskets. The fortress walls erupted in flames and smoke as hundreds of guns discharged simultaneously. The sound was overwhelming, echoing off the walls and across the river. Russian soldiers, caught in the open ground before the walls, began to fall by the dozens, by the hundreds, shot down by the defenders' concentrated fire. But the assault continued with relentless determination. Soldiers reached the walls and threw up their scaling ladders. Men began climbing under fire, rung by rung, while defenders above them fired down and tried to push the ladders away. Some ladders fell, sending screaming men tumbling to the ground. But more ladders went up and more soldiers climbed. Alexander was everywhere during the assault, moving from one attack point to another on horseback, encouraging troops, directing reserves toward points where the assault was struggling, committing forces at critical moments to maintain momentum. At one particularly desperate moment, when a key assault column was pinned down by devastating defensive fire and seemed on the verge of breaking, Alexander personally rode to them, rallied them with his presence, and led them forward. A horse was killed under him, but he continued on foot, sword in hand, leading his soldiers toward the walls. The fighting was savage and confused, swirling through the streets and buildings of the fortress as Russian forces gradually fought their way inside. Each bastion, each building, each street became a separate battle. Ottoman soldiers defended courageously, fighting from behind barricades and from windows, contesting every yard of ground. But the sheer determination and superior training of the Russian soldiers gradually prevailed. By late morning, Russian forces controlled large sections of the fortress. The Ottoman garrison, seeing that the defense was hopeless, tried to negotiate surrender, but the momentum of battle was too great to stop immediately. The fighting continued into the afternoon as Russian soldiers cleared the last pockets of resistance. By evening, it was over. The impregnable fortress of Ishmael had fallen in less than 12 hours of fighting. The garrison had been destroyed or captured, and the great fortress on the Danube belonged to Russia. The cost had been terrible, perhaps 4,000 to 6,000 Russian casualties, with Ottoman losses even higher. But Alexander had achieved in one day what conventional wisdom said would take months or was perhaps impossible. News of the victory sent shock waves through Europe. Military experts had considered Ishmael impossible to take by storm. Frederick the Great, hearing of the victory shortly before his death, reportedly said, "Suvorov has achieved what I would not have attempted." The capture of Ishmael was immediately recognized as one of the most extraordinary achievements in military history, a testament to what superior training, leadership, and determination could accomplish. For Alexander himself, now 60 years old, Ishmael represented both a triumph and a burden. He had achieved an incredible victory, but the cost in lives weighed heavily on him. After the battle, walking through the captured fortress and seeing the thousands of dead, he reportedly said, "I have spilled enough blood." He was a warrior and would continue to fight when duty called, but he understood the terrible human cost of warfare in a way that many generals never did. Chapter 7: Poland and Years of Difficulty. The 1790s brought new challenges for Alexander Suvorov, testing not only his military skills but also his moral character and political acumen. The decade began with continued success in the Ottoman War, which finally ended in 1792 with the Treaty of Jassy, confirming Russian control of the Crimea and expanding Russian territory along the Black Sea coast. But this triumph was soon followed by assignments that would trouble Alexander's conscience and test his loyalty. In 1794, Poland rose in rebellion against Russian and Prussian control. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, once one of Europe's great powers, had been progressively weakened by internal divisions and external pressures over the course of the 18th century. In a series of partitions in 1772, 1793, and ultimately 1795, Poland was divided among Russia, Prussia, and Austria, ceasing to exist as an independent state. Many Poles refused to accept this fate. In March 1794, Tadeusz Kosciuszko, a military leader who had fought in the American Revolution, led an uprising aimed at restoring Polish independence. The rebellion spread rapidly across Polish territories, attracting widespread popular support. Polish forces achieved several early victories against Russian and Prussian troops, and for a time it seemed possible that Poland might indeed regain its independence. Empress Catherine, alarmed by the rebellion's success, appointed Alexander to command the Russian forces tasked with suppressing the uprising. This was not an assignment he welcomed. Throughout his career, Alexander had fought against foreign enemies, Turks, Prussians, Swedes. Fighting to suppress a people seeking independence was morally different and personally troubling. But Alexander was a soldier, trained to obey orders and serve his sovereign. He accepted the command and began operations in the summer of 1794. The campaign was difficult not only militarily but emotionally. The Polish rebels were fighting for their nation's freedom, for their right to govern themselves, for ideals that resonated deeply with Enlightenment thinking that Alexander himself had absorbed through his education. Yet duty required him to suppress this struggle. Alexander approached the campaign with his characteristic tactical skill, but also with an awareness of the human tragedy involved. He sought to end the conflict as quickly as possible to minimize suffering on all sides. He fought effectively, defeating Polish forces in several engagements, but he also showed unusual mercy for the time, offering clemency to rebels who laid down their arms. The campaign included several significant battles. At Brest, Alexander defeated a Polish force under General Sierakowski. At Kobrin, he outmaneuvered another Polish army. These victories were tactically impressive but gave Alexander little satisfaction. He was defeating brave men fighting for their homeland, and this troubled him deeply. The campaign culminated in the storm of Warsaw's Praga suburb in November 1794. Praga, across the Vistula River from Warsaw proper, was defended by Polish forces and armed civilians who were determined to resist to the last. The assault on Praga, carried out on November 4, 1794, was successful but resulted in heavy casualties, including many civilians. The aftermath of Praga was deeply troubling. In the chaos following the assault, Russian soldiers killed not only combatants but also civilians, including women and children. The exact numbers are disputed by historians, but thousands certainly died. Whether Alexander could have prevented this, whether he tried to stop it, whether he bore responsibility, these questions haunted him for the rest of his life. Alexander himself was reportedly appalled by what happened at Praga. Accounts suggest he tried to stop the killing once the military objective was achieved, but the violence had gained its own momentum in the chaos of urban combat. He left Warsaw as soon as possible after the battle, deeply disturbed by what he had witnessed. The Polish campaigns remain the most controversial episodes of Alexander's career. He had been given an assignment to suppress a rebellion, and he executed it effectively from a military standpoint. But the human cost, and particularly the civilian casualties at Praga, were a stain that troubled his conscience. Years later, he would say that he had served Russia faithfully, but that some victories brought no honor, only sorrow. Following the Polish campaigns, Alexander returned to command positions in southern Russia. He continued to train troops and prepare defensive positions against potential Ottoman attacks, though actual warfare had ceased for the time being. These were years when he could refine his tactical theories and put them into systematic form. It was during the mid-1790s that Alexander wrote down many of his ideas in a more organized way. He compiled his training methods and tactical principles into what became known as the Science of Victory, a collection of maxims, training procedures, and tactical doctrines. The document was written in Alexander's characteristic style, direct, practical, using simple language that any soldier could understand rather than academic jargon. The Science of Victory covered all aspects of military training and operations. On training, train hard, fight easy. The more you sweat in training, the less you bleed in battle. On speed, speed and surprise are worth more than numbers. Strike quickly, before the enemy can prepare. On morale, a soldier must love his commander, care for your men, and they will follow you anywhere. On tactics, The bullet is a fool, the bayonet is a hero. Close with the enemy quickly and finish him with cold steel. On logistics, an army marches on its stomach. Feed your soldiers well, and they'll march anywhere. On leadership, a general must lead from the front, sharing the dangers his men face. How can you ask them to go where you won't go yourself? These principles, developed over decades of experience, became foundational texts for Russian military education. They were taught in military academies, studied by officers, memorized by soldiers. Alexander's influence on Russian military doctrine would persist long after his death. But the mid-1790s also brought personal difficulties for Alexander. In 1795, Empress Catherine died and was succeeded by her son, Paul I. The new emperor was very different from his mother, temperamental, suspicious, and given to sudden changes of policy. He distrusted many of his mother's favorites and supporters, and he took an immediate dislike to Alexander. Part of the problem was personal. Paul valued elaborate court ceremony and expected subordinates to show him elaborate deference and flattery. Alexander, by nature and long habit, was direct and informal. He spoke plainly, cared nothing for court protocol, and was uncomfortable with the elaborate ceremonial that Paul insisted upon. To Paul, this seemed like disrespect. To Alexander, it was simply his nature. He was a soldier, not a courtier. There were also policy differences. Paul had different ideas about military organization and training than Alexander. The new emperor favored Prussian-style military methods, with emphasis on parade ground precision and elaborate drill. Alexander believed these methods were inferior to his own emphasis on practical combat training. When asked to implement Paul's preferred methods, Alexander tried to comply but could not hide his skepticism about their effectiveness. The relationship between emperor and general deteriorated steadily. Paul began to criticize Alexander publicly, to question his methods, to assign him to less important positions. For Alexander, who had devoted his entire life to military service and had never experienced anything but success and recognition, this treatment was deeply painful. In 1797, Paul ordered Alexander to accept the Prussian style of drill and training for his troops. Alexander complied reluctantly, but he also wrote to the emperor explaining why he believed these methods were inferior. The letter was respectful but frank, and it infuriated Paul. The emperor sent back a harsh response, criticizing Alexander's presumption in questioning imperial policy. Matters came to a head in 1798 when Alexander, frustrated by what he saw as harmful changes to military training that would reduce the effectiveness of Russian forces, wrote another letter to the emperor. This time he was even more direct, arguing that the emperor's policies were based on a misunderstanding of effective military training and would weaken rather than strengthen the army. This was too much for Paul. He dismissed Alexander from all his commands and ordered him to retire to his estate. For a man who had never known anything but military service, whose entire identity was bound up in being a soldier and commander, this was a devastating blow. Alexander was 68 years old, at an age when retirement might have been appropriate anyway, but the dismissal in disgrace was deeply wounding. He withdrew to Konchanskoye, his estate in the Novgorod region, where he lived in a kind of internal exile for 2 years. These were difficult years, marked by frustration, wounded pride, and fear that his life's work would be forgotten or undone. He occupied himself with managing his estate, corresponding with friends, and writing down more of his military theories. But he chafed at enforced inactivity, feeling that he still had much to contribute and that being forced into retirement was unjust. Yet even in retirement, Alexander maintained his disciplines. He continued to rise early, to exercise daily, to live simply. He read extensively, maintained correspondence with officers who had served under him, and thought deeply about military theory and history. The old soldier, though officially retired, could not stop being a soldier in his heart. Chapter 8: Redemption and the Italian Campaign. In 1799, Alexander Suvorov's fortunes changed dramatically. Europe was in crisis, facing the aggressive expansion of revolutionary France under the military leadership of young Napoleon Bonaparte. French armies had conquered much of Italy, had invaded Egypt, and threatened to dominate the entire continent. Austria and Russia formed a new coalition to counter French power, and Russia needed its most capable general. In February 1799, Tsar Paul I, swallowing his pride and recognizing that national interest was more important than personal animosity, recalled Alexander from retirement. The emperor appointed him to command a combined Russian-Austrian army with orders to drive the French out of Italy. For Alexander, this represented redemption and vindication. Despite his disgrace and forced retirement, he was being called back because the empire needed him. It was recognition that his skills and experience were irreplaceable. Alexander received the news with mixed emotions. He was already 69 years old, an extraordinary age for the time, and the years of retirement had not been kind to his health. He knew that the campaign would test him physically and mentally in ways that might exceed even his considerable endurance. But he also felt a surge of energy and purpose. He was being given one more chance to serve, one more opportunity to demonstrate his lifetime's worth of military wisdom, one more campaign to add to his legendary career. He departed for Italy in April 1799, traveling through Austria and arriving at the army's headquarters later that month. The journey itself was exhausting for a man of his age, but Alexander showed no sign of fatigue when he arrived. He threw himself into assessing the situation, meeting with Austrian commanders, reviewing his forces, and planning operations with characteristic energy and thoroughness. The situation in Italy was complex. French forces controlled most of northern Italy, with garrisons in key cities and fortresses. The French armies, though not as numerous as the Allied forces, were well-positioned and commanded by capable generals who had been forged in years of revolutionary warfare. They were experienced, confident, and fighting on familiar terrain. The Allied command structure was complicated by national rivalries and differing objectives. The Austrians wanted to restore Austrian influence in Italy and were suspicious of Russian intentions. Various Italian states had their own interests and agendas. Coordinating this multinational coalition required diplomatic skill as well as military expertise. Alexander quickly cut through the complexity with his characteristic decisiveness. His strategic concept was straightforward: defeat the French armies in detail, using rapid movement to concentrate superior force at critical points before the French could unite their scattered forces. He would avoid long sieges and elaborate maneuvers, instead seeking decisive battles that would quickly clear the French from Italy. The campaign began in late April with the Battle of Cassano d'Adda on April 27, 1799. The French army under General Jean-Victor Marie Moreau held a strong defensive position along the Adda River. The river itself formed a formidable obstacle, and the French had prepared defenses on the far bank. Most commanders would have attempted to outflank the position or conduct careful reconnaissance before committing to an attack. Alexander ordered an immediate frontal assault. His soldiers, including both Russian troops who had served under him before and Austrian units new to his command, plunged into the river and stormed the opposite bank. The attack came with such sudden violence that the French were overwhelmed despite their strong position. By evening, Alexander had won a decisive victory, driving the French from their defensive line and opening the road into northern Italy. The victory at Cassano demonstrated several things. First, that despite his age, Alexander had lost none of his tactical brilliance or aggressive spirit. Second, that his principles of warfare, speed, surprise, and violent assault remained as effective as ever. Third, that soldiers responded to his leadership with enthusiasm and determination even if they had never served under him before. 3 days later came the Battle of the Trebia, actually a series of engagements fought over 3 days from June 17th to 19th, 1799. The French commander, General Jacques MacDonald, had assembled a strong army and was marching to relieve French garrisons in northern Italy. Alexander, though his forces were initially scattered, managed to concentrate enough troops to engage MacDonald's army while additional forces marched rapidly to join the battle. The battle was fierce and complex, with both armies maneuvering and fighting across several days. MacDonald was a competent general, but he found himself consistently outmaneuvered by the elderly Russian commander who seemed to anticipate every move. Alexander coordinated his forces beautifully, bringing up reinforcements at critical moments, launching counterattacks exactly when they would have maximum effect, maintaining pressure on the French forces even when his own troops were exhausted. On the third day, Alexander launched a decisive assault that broke the French army. MacDonald's forces retreated in disorder, having suffered heavy casualties and lost much of their equipment and artillery. It was another complete victory for Alexander, achieved through superior tactics, excellent coordination of multiple forces, and inspirational leadership. But the greatest victory of the Italian campaign was still to come. In August 1799, the French had concentrated their remaining forces in Italy under General Barthélemy Catherine Joubert. Joubert was young, capable, and determined to reverse the string of French defeats. He assembled a strong army and took up positions near the town of Novi, preparing for a decisive battle that would determine control of northern Italy. Alexander, reinforced by additional Russian and Austrian troops, marched to meet him. The Battle of Novi, fought on August 15, 1799, was one of the largest and bloodiest battles of the Italian campaign. Both armies were strong, both commanders competent, and both sides understood that this battle would likely be decisive. The battle began at dawn and raged throughout the day across the hills and valleys around Novi. The French fought desperately, launching multiple attacks against Allied positions. Alexander coordinated the defensive battle brilliantly, using the terrain to advantage, shifting reserves to threaten points, launching counterattacks at precisely the right moments to throw French assaults off balance. General Joubert was killed early in the fighting when a bullet struck him in the chest as he led his troops forward. His death disrupted French command, but his subordinates rallied the army and continued the battle. Throughout the hot summer day, the fighting continued with savage intensity. Both sides suffered heavy casualties. The smoke of gunpowder hung thick over the battlefield, and the ground became slippery with blood. Alexander, despite his nearly 70 years, was constantly moving across the battlefield on horseback. His white hair and simple uniform made him easily recognizable, and soldiers throughout the Allied army drew inspiration from seeing their commander at the points of greatest danger. He seemed tireless, seemed unafraid, seemed always to know exactly what needed to be done and when. By late afternoon, the French attacks had exhausted themselves against the Allied defenses. Now Alexander went over to the offensive, launching coordinated attacks against the weakened French positions. His soldiers, seeing their moment, attacked with tremendous determination. The French lines, weakened by hours of combat and demoralized by their commander's death, began to break. As evening approached, the French army collapsed into retreat. They had suffered devastating losses, perhaps 7,000 killed and wounded, with thousands more captured. The Allied forces had also suffered heavily, but they held the field and had achieved a decisive strategic victory. With the Battle of Novi, French power in northern Italy was effectively destroyed. The victory at Novi was celebrated throughout Europe. Alexander Suvorov, the elderly Russian general who had been in disgrace just months earlier, had achieved 3 decisive victories in as many months and had driven the French from territories they had controlled for years. The Austrian emperor made him a prince of the Holy Roman Empire, and celebrations were held in Vienna, St. Petersburg, and Italian cities liberated from French control. But for Alexander, there was little time to rest or celebrate. The Allied command was already planning the next phase of operations. The strategic situation in Europe remained fluid, with French forces still powerful in Switzerland and southern Germany. Alexander proposed a bold plan: lead his army over the Alps into Switzerland, link up with other Russian forces there, and strike at the French from an unexpected direction. The Austrian high command was skeptical. The Alpine passes were treacherous, especially as autumn approached. Moving an entire army with its equipment and supplies through mountain terrain would be extraordinarily difficult. Many thought it was impossible or at least too risky to attempt. But Alexander was insistent, and his string of victories in Italy had given him enormous prestige and authority. The plan was approved, though the Austrian commanders provided minimal support, some of them privately hoping the operation would fail and eliminate their increasingly powerful and independent-minded Russian ally. In September 1799, at age 69, Alexander Suvorov prepared to lead his army across the Swiss Alps. What followed would be the most legendary and extraordinary episode of his entire career, an achievement that would be remembered alongside Hannibal's crossing of the Alps over 2,000 years earlier. Chapter 9: The Swiss Alps, an Epic of Endurance. In September 1799, Alexander Suvorov began the operation that would become the most celebrated and remembered achievement of his long career: the crossing of the Swiss Alps. This was an undertaking that tested the limits of human endurance, military discipline, and leadership. It was an epic of suffering and determination that would be told and retold for generations as an example of what soldiers and their commanders could achieve through sheer will and courage. Alexander's army numbered about 21,000 Russian soldiers, veterans of the Italian campaign and hardened by months of marching and fighting. They were tough, experienced troops who trusted their commander absolutely. But nothing in their experience had prepared them for what lay ahead. The Swiss Alps in autumn were one of the most formidable natural obstacles on Earth. Towering peaks, narrow passes, sheer cliffs, roaring rivers, and weather that could turn deadly without warning. The strategic plan called for Alexander's forces to cross the Alps via the St. Gotthard Pass, one of the main routes through the mountains, and then descend into the Swiss cantons to link up with other Russian forces commanded by General Alexander Korsakov. Together, they would coordinate with Austrian forces to drive the French from Switzerland and strike into southern Germany. The plan was sound in theory but depended on several assumptions: that the Austrian forces would properly support the operation, that Korsakov's army would be in position when Alexander arrived, that the Alpine passes would remain navigable, and that the French would not have time to organize effective resistance. As events would prove, almost every one of these assumptions would prove false. The crossing began on September 21st, 1799. Alexander, refusing all suggestions that he ride in a carriage or take any easier route than his soldiers, mounted his horse and rode at the head of his troops. The soldiers watched their white-haired commander, now nearly 70 years old, taking his place at the front of the column, and they felt ashamed to show any weakness themselves. If the old general could endure the hardships ahead, so could they. The first stage of the journey took the army along mountain valleys and through lower passes. The terrain was difficult but manageable, and progress was steady. Alexander maintained strict discipline, ensuring that the column moved in good order, that supply wagons kept up, that tired soldiers were given adequate rest breaks. He knew that the real test still lay ahead. The first major obstacle was the St. Gothard Pass itself, which climbed to over 6,900 feet above sea level. The path was narrow and treacherous, barely wide enough for a single wagon in many places, with sheer drops on one side and rock walls on the other. As the army climbed higher, the air grew thinner and colder. Soldiers who were used to the plains of Russia or the valleys of Italy found themselves struggling for breath, their legs trembling with exhaustion as they climbed ever upward. French forces held defensive positions at critical choke points along the route, including fortified positions at the Devil's Bridge, a stone bridge that spanned the legend of Alexander Suvorov, a bedtime story. Chapter 1. A boy named Alexander. In the gentle days of autumn, when the leaves turned gold and crimson across the vast Russian landscape, a story begins that will carry us through the remarkable life of one of history's greatest military commanders. Close your eyes and imagine the year 1730, in the grand city of Moscow, where the streets were cobbled with ancient stones and the air filled with the scent of wood smoke and falling leaves. In a noble household, there lived a boy named Alexander Vasilyevich Suvorov. He was not a strong child, not at first. His body was small and frail, and he often fell ill during the long, cold Russian winters. His mother would wrap him in warm blankets and tell him stories by the fireplace, while outside the wind howled through the bare branches of birch trees. The flames danced and flickered, casting shadows on the walls, and young Alexander would listen with wide, attentive eyes. His mother, Avdotia Fedosyevna, was a woman of gentle disposition but strong character. She came from a noble family and had been educated in the manner of Russian aristocratic women of her time. She spoke French fluently, knew literature and poetry, and had a deep faith that she passed to her son. In the evenings, when Alexander's health permitted, she would read to him from books of history and tales of ancient heroes. Her voice was soft and melodious, and Alexander would close his eyes and imagine himself in those distant times and places. His father, Vasily Ivanovich Suvorov, was a general in the Imperial Russian Army, a man of discipline and honor. He would return home from his duties wearing his uniform with its gleaming buttons, and Alexander would watch him with a mixture of awe and longing. The boy dreamed of becoming strong, of serving his country, of leading soldiers into battle. But his frail body seemed to mock these dreams. Vasily Ivanovich was a veteran of Peter the Great's campaigns, having served in the Great Northern War against Sweden. He had seen the transformation of Russia from a relatively backward nation into a major European power, had witnessed the creation of Russia's modern army and navy, had participated in victories that expanded Russian territory and influence. He carried with him the memories of those campaigns, the lessons learned in decades of service, and he observed his frail son with both concern and hidden hope. The Suvorov family home in Moscow was substantial but not ostentatious, reflecting Vasily Ivanovich's practical military temperament. The rooms were furnished with solid, functional furniture rather than elaborate decorations. The walls held portraits of ancestors, maps of campaigns, and weapons from earlier generations. For young Alexander, the house was a museum of military history, each object telling a story of service and sacrifice. Yet Alexander possessed something that could not be measured by physical strength alone. Within his small frame burned an indomitable spirit, a mind as sharp as any sword, and a determination that would one day move mountains. He would spend hours in his father's library, surrounded by the musty smell of old books and leather bindings, reading about the great military commanders of history. He devoured accounts of Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, Hannibal, and the legendary generals who had shaped empires and changed the course of human events. The library was Alexander's sanctuary, a place where the weak boy could become strong through knowledge. Dust motes floated through the sunlight that streamed through tall windows, and the young boy would sit cross-legged on the floor, his finger tracing the lines of tactical diagrams and battle formations. He studied the Roman legions, the Macedonian phalanx, the strategies of ancient warriors who had conquered vast territories through wit and cunning as much as through force. He read works by military theorists, Vegetius's De Re Militari, Morris's Strategicon, accounts of the campaigns of Gustavus Adolphus and Charles XII of Sweden. He studied mathematics and geometry, understanding that military engineering and artillery required precise calculation. He learned geography, memorizing the terrain of Europe and Asia, understanding how mountains, rivers, and plains affected military operations. He studied history not just for the stories but for the lessons, always asking himself, why did this commander succeed? Why did that army fail? What principles of warfare transcend time and place? But Alexander did not merely dream. He understood that dreams without action are like seeds never planted. So, in the quiet hours of dawn, when the rest of the household still slept, the young boy would creep out to the courtyard. There, in the pale morning light, he began to train his body as rigorously as he trained his mind. He would run around the courtyard, his breath creating small clouds in the cold air. At first, he could barely complete one lap before his lungs burned and his legs trembled. But he persisted. Day after day, week after week, month after month, he pushed himself harder. He would do exercises he had read about in military manuals, attempting to build strength in his thin arms and legs. When winter came and snow blanketed the ground, he would roll in the snow, hardening his body against the cold, teaching himself to endure discomfort. The servants would watch with concern as the young master subjected himself to these harsh exercises. They would whisper among themselves, wondering if the boy had lost his senses. Some tried to intervene, but Alexander would politely but firmly refuse their attempts to stop him. He had a vision of what he needed to become, and no amount of comfort or well-meaning concern would deter him. His mother worried, pleading with him to take care of himself, to not push so hard. She would stand at the window in her morning dress, watching her son train in the cold courtyard, and tears would gather in her eyes. "Alexander, my dear," she would say when he came inside, his cheeks red from cold and exertion, "you will make yourself ill. Please, rest, take care of yourself." But Alexander would smile at her with gentle determination and say, "Mother, a general must be strong in body and mind. I will serve Russia one day, and I must prepare." Then he would kiss her hand respectfully and return to his studies, leaving his mother to worry and pray for her determined son. As the seasons turned and years passed slowly like a river flowing through the Russian countryside, Alexander began to transform. The change was gradual, almost imperceptible day to day, but undeniable over months and years. His body grew stronger, his endurance increased, his health improved. The frequent illnesses that had plagued his childhood became less common, less severe. His mind grew sharper through constant study and self-discipline. His determination, already remarkable in childhood, became truly unshakable. He studied languages with the same intensity he brought to everything else. He learned to speak German and French fluently, knowing that these were the languages of European diplomacy and military science. He could read Latin, giving him access to classical texts. He memorized military regulations and tactical principles. He analyzed historical battles, understanding why commanders made certain decisions, learning from both their victories and their defeats. Young Alexander developed an extraordinary memory. He could recall conversations word for word, could reproduce maps he had seen weeks earlier, could cite passages from military texts he had read years before. This phenomenal recall would later serve him well in military service, allowing him to remember terrain details, unit positions, and supply situations without constantly referring to written notes. He also developed what would become a lifelong habit of rising extremely early. While others slept until the sun was well up, Alexander would wake in the pre-dawn darkness, light a candle, and begin his day's work. He believed that the quiet morning hours, when the world was still and distractions were few, were the most productive time for study and contemplation. This habit, formed in childhood, persisted throughout his entire life. When Alexander was 13 years old, a family friend visited his father's house. This friend was General Abraham Hannibal, an African nobleman who had been brought to Russia as a child and had risen to become one of Peter the Great's most trusted officers. He was an elderly man now, with a distinguished bearing and eyes that had seen countless campaigns. The general noticed young Alexander studying a map of Europe in the library, moving small toy soldiers across the terrain, reenacting historical battles. General Hannibal was the great-grandfather of Russia's most famous poet, Alexander Pushkin, though neither man knew what literary greatness would emerge from their family line. He had lived an extraordinary life, captured in Africa as a child, brought to Constantinople, then to Russia where Peter the Great became his godfather and patron. He had studied military engineering in France, fought in numerous campaigns, and risen to high rank through merit rather than birth. In the elderly general's weathered face, young Alexander saw living proof that determination and ability could overcome any disadvantage of birth or circumstance. General Hannibal watched in silence for several minutes, impressed by the boy's concentration and tactical understanding. The young boy was recreating the Battle of Narva from the Great Northern War, positioning Swedish and Russian forces according to historical accounts, analyzing how the battle had unfolded and considering alternative strategies that might have changed the outcome. Finally, the general spoke, his voice deep and measured. "Young man, you have the mind of a strategist. Tell me, which commander do you most admire?" Alexander looked up, startled to find the famous general watching him. He stood quickly and bowed respectfully, as he had been taught. But he answered without hesitation, his voice clear despite his youth. "Sir, I admire them all, for they each had unique strengths. Alexander the Great possessed boldness and the ability to inspire absolute devotion. Caesar combined military genius with political acumen. Hannibal showed that audacity and brilliant tactics can overcome numerical disadvantages. But I most respect those who cared for their soldiers, who led from the front, who shared in their hardships. A true commander earns